What if I told you that what's coming isn't just another economic challenge, but a significant moment that God can use to reshape how we live, how we serve, and how we trust in His provision? Most people anticipate the familiar cycles, ups and downs, boom and bust, then recovery. But history and indeed Scripture reminds us that sometimes God allows the cycles to deepen, to lead us into a season of long-term transformation, not just a temporary downturn. And the true question isn't merely if we'll get through it, but how prepared our hearts and minds will be when the world shifts in ways many can't yet fathom. Are we ready to embrace new beginnings with faith? When we hear the word recession, we often picture something familiar, perhaps like what happened in the early 2000s or even 2008. Companies lay off workers, the stock market drops, housing prices fall, and then after a year or two, things bounce back. It's painful, but it's temporary, like a bad storm that passes through your neighborhood. You board up the windows, wait it out, and then start cleaning up. But what I, Joel Osteen, your pastor, television preacher, and businessman am observing now, what many thoughtful minds are acknowledging, isn't that kind of storm. It's a profound shift, a repatterning of the underlying systems that govern how our economy works. And often, by the time the full scope of God's work in transformation is visible, it's already well underway. Think about our grandparents' generation for a moment. They lived through the Great Depression, and that wasn't just an economic downturn, it was a profound reorganization of how money, work, and society functioned. The world that emerged in the 1940s and 50s was fundamentally different from the world of the 1920s. New institutions, new relationships between government and citizens, new ways of understanding security and prosperity. My friends, that's the kind of change we may be facing now. Not just a temporary setback, but a divine opportunity for a rewiring of our global systems, driven by forces much bigger than any human policy or any particular industry's problems. To grasp the unique nature of this season, we need to step back and recognize the powerful forces at play, knowing that God works through all things. And the first of these forces touches every aspect of our financial lives, yet often remains unseen until its impact becomes undeniable. It's like a quiet undercurrent, something we, as the children of God, need to be aware of. Imagine your household budget, but scaled up to entire nations. For decades now, really since the 1980s, countries, companies, and families have been living increasingly on borrowed money. Now, responsible borrowing can be a powerful tool for progress. When you took out a mortgage to buy your home, that debt probably made sense. You traded monthly payments for the security of ownership, and over time, your home likely increased in value. The same principle works for countries and businesses. When you borrow money to build a factory or improve infrastructure, that debt can pay for itself by increasing productivity and economic growth. It's like borrowing money to go to college. The debt is worth it if your increased earning power more than covers the cost. But here's where we must apply wisdom, my friends. For the past 4 decades, we've seen a global economy built on the assumption that debt can keep expanding indefinitely, as long as it grows slightly slower than the economy itself. It's like a balloon that keeps inflating. It works wonderfully until it doesn't. And as your pastor and businessman, I believe we are approaching a moment where that until it doesn't is becoming very clear. I was reflecting on a significant historical moment from 1971. When President Nixon announced that America would no longer exchange gold for dollars, many, including a young observer on the New York Stock Exchange floor, anticipated a crash. Yet, the market soared. Why? Because when you make money easier to create, things priced in that money tend to go up. That moment marked the beginning of what economists call the debt super cycle. For over 50 years, the solution to economic trouble often involved making borrowing cheaper and easier, lowering interest rates, printing more money, encouraging more debt, and it served its purpose until the weight of that debt began to consume more and more of our resources just to maintain it. Think about this in practical, prayerful terms. The United States government now dedicates around $1 trillion annually just to service its existing debt. That's a significant portion that could otherwise build up our nation, supporting infrastructure, education, healthcare, and vital social programs. It's like a family so burdened by credit card interest that they struggle to afford basic necessities. And it gets worse. Every year, the government has to borrow more. That's the position many countries find themselves in today. And this pattern isn't limited to governments. Corporations have followed a similar path, borrowing extensively at incredibly low interest rates to buy back their own stock, pay dividends, and fund expansion. But now that interest rates are rising, those loans are becoming much more expensive to maintain. And then there are ordinary families, mortgages, credit cards, student loans, car payments. The average household carries a heavier debt burden relative to income than almost ever before. For many of our seniors and retirees, this is a particular concern, living on fixed incomes while the demands grow. But debt is only one piece of the puzzle. The second force comes from something we all feel every day: the cost of living. You've probably noticed it everywhere. Prices for basic necessities have been rising faster than they have in decades. And this isn't the kind of temporary price spike we sometimes see during economic disruptions. This feels different, more persistent, more structural. Traditional economic thinking says that recessions cure inflation. When people lose jobs and cut back on spending, demand falls and prices should come down. It's like a pressure valve that releases steam from an overheated system. But what we're experiencing now might not respond to that traditional cure. Here's why this is particularly challenging for those of you who are retired or approaching retirement. Inflation, my friends, acts like a hidden tax on the diligence of saving. Every year, as prices climb faster than your investments grow, your hard-earned savings effectively diminish in real value. That nest egg, carefully built over decades, starts shrinking, even if the numbers on your statements appear unchanged. It's a reminder that true security comes not just from what we accumulate, but from our faith in divine provision. This pressure from inflation can force us into difficult choices, perhaps generic brands instead of preferred ones, delaying that cherished visit to grandchildren, or even postponing essential home repairs or medical care. These aren't just financial adjustments, they're life adjustments that can impact our health, our relationships, and our sense of peace. But even in these challenges, we can find strength and make wise decisions. The challenge is that the very policies intended to stimulate the economy, like lowering interest rates and increasing government spending, can paradoxically fuel inflation. It's like trying to cool a room by turning up the thermostat. We need a different approach, one rooted in wisdom. And as financial values shift, so do global power dynamics, adding layers of complexity to our future. For much of our lives, the world has operated under what we might call the American system. The dollar was the world's primary currency. American companies dominated global markets, and American consumers drove worldwide demand. While not perfect, it brought a degree of predictability. But that system, my friends, is undergoing a profound transformation, and what's emerging is more intricate and less certain. It's a reminder that our ultimate security is not in any earthly system, but in God. We saw this firsthand with the supply chain disruptions during the pandemic. Suddenly, products from across the globe couldn't reach us. Medicines manufactured in China were unavailable in American pharmacies. Computer chips made in Taiwan couldn't reach American factories. We realized our deep dependence on a global system we presumed was stable, but proved to be quite fragile. It was a wake-up call, showing us the need for resilience and local strength. Now, nations are intentionally reshaping these supply chains. They're bringing production closer to home, even if it costs more. They're forming new trade partnerships that don't include the United States. They're creating alternative systems for international payments that bypass the dollar. While this may not be detrimental in the long run, it certainly brings short-term disruption. And disruption, my friends, creates uncertainty for businesses, investors, and families trying to make wise decisions. For our seniors who value stability, this means plans may need to adapt. But remember, God is not surprised by these changes. Together, debt, inflation, and geopolitics create turbulence. But there's another force that magnifies them all: technology. As your pastor and businessman, I've had the privilege of observing many advancements. And I can tell you that the technological transformation we're experiencing now is truly unlike anything we've witnessed before. It's a divine acceleration of human ingenuity. We're not just talking about faster computers or better smartphones. We're talking about artificial intelligence that can perform tasks we thought only humans could do. Automation that's moving from factories to offices, and digital systems that are reshaping entire industries. Now, technology has always eliminated some jobs while creating others. When automobiles replaced horses, blacksmiths became mechanics. When computers replaced typewriters, secretaries became administrative assistants with new digital skills. The pattern has been consistent: short-term disruption followed by adaptation and new opportunities. But this time feels different in both pace and scope. Artificial intelligence isn't just replacing manual labor, it's now reaching into cognitive work. Legal research, financial analysis, medical diagnosis, even creative writing tasks that require years of education and experience are being automated. And the pace, my friends, is accelerating exponentially. What takes a skilled professional hours to do today might take an AI system minutes to do next year. For those of you who are already retired, this might seem like someone else's problem, but it affects you too in profound ways that might not be immediately obvious. Your children and grandchildren are navigating job markets that are increasingly uncertain. The companies whose stocks are in your retirement portfolio are having to completely reinvent themselves. Even the healthcare system you depend on is being transformed by new technologies that promise better outcomes, but also create new complexities and costs. These disruptions affect real lives, communities, and generations differently. But God can use these challenges to open new doors. When I reflect on the human impact of these coming changes, I see three groups of people, each facing unique challenges, yet all connected by these profound underlying forces and by the love of God. First, our precious seniors and retirees. Many of you have spent decades building financial security, and now you see it challenged by forces that often feel beyond your control. Rising healthcare costs that keep rising faster than your income, investment portfolios that seem to lose value just as you need them most, pension systems that promise less and deliver even less than they promise. But it's more than just money. It's about maintaining your autonomy and dignity. When inflation eats away at your purchasing power, it can feel like you're losing control over your own life. When technology changes how basic services work, you can feel left behind in a world that's moving too fast. When economic disruption affects your adult children, your heart aches with concern about their future. But remember, your wisdom and experience are invaluable assets. Then there are our working-age adults, perhaps your children. They are striving to build the same kind of security you managed to create, but in an environment far more challenging than what many of us faced at their age. They're dealing with job markets that seem increasingly unstable, housing costs that seem impossibly high, and debt burdens that you never had to carry. They need our prayers and our understanding. And finally, our younger generations. Your grandchildren, perhaps, coming of age in a world where traditional paths to prosperity feel uncertain or blocked. College costs more, but guarantees less. Home ownership feels like a distant dream. Starting a family demands financial resources that seem increasingly difficult to acquire. But even for them, God has a plan, and new pathways will emerge. What unites these challenges, my friends, is that they are not mere temporary setbacks that will resolve themselves if we just wait. They are symptoms of deeper shifts in how our world operates, and therefore the solutions must be deeper too, rooted in faith, wisdom, and proactive living. Now, if we stopped here, it might sound like a message of gloom, but that's not the message of hope and victory. History, and more importantly, our faith, shows us that even in times of great upheaval, incredible opportunity arises for those who choose to adapt and trust. I've been privileged to observe how people of faith respond to seasons of profound change, and it's truly inspiring. We tend to think that the way things are now is the way they've always been and the way they'll always be. But if you look back over the centuries, you see that what we consider normal is actually quite temporary. Consider the era your parents or grandparents navigated. The 1930s brought devastation. Unemployment reached 25%. Banks failed. People lost their homes and their life savings. It seemed like the end of the world. But what emerged from that very crisis was one of the most prosperous periods in American history. The GI Bill, Social Security, the interstate highway system, the space program. Innovations that created opportunities our grandparents couldn't have imagined, all born out of adversity. Or reflect on the 1970s, a season that, in many ways, echoes our present challenges. Inflation was running in double digits. Energy costs were soaring. American confidence was shaken by war and political scandal. People spoke of national decline, about the end of American prosperity. What did those who not only survived, but thrived during these times have in common? They didn't dwell on the past, waiting for things to go back to normal. No, they looked ahead with vision, adapted their skills, diversified their resources, and most importantly, they maintained an unwavering belief in God's faithfulness and in the power of human ingenuity and spiritual resilience to overcome any challenge. I often reflect on the stories my own grandmother shared about the Depression. Her family lost their farm, but instead of succumbing to despair, they moved to the city where my grandfather learned new skills and, by God's grace, started a small business. It wasn't the life they had meticulously planned, but it became a good life, a blessed life. And the lessons they carried, frugality, adaptability, and the profound support of community, served them powerfully for the rest of their days. This pattern repeats throughout history. Economic disruption often compels us to become more resourceful, more collaborative, more innovative. It strips away old assumptions and forces us into fresh, faith-filled thinking. And while that process can be uncomfortable, it often leads to breakthroughs and solutions that are even better than what we had before. So what does adaptation look like for us today in a world facing challenges beyond typical economic cycles? Let me start with something personal, for I believe the most powerful transformations always begin with our individual choices and our relationship with God. And the first choice is about our mindset towards learning and spiritual growth. Historically, education was largely confined to our younger years, but that model is evolving rapidly. Now, it's about staying curious, staying engaged with new ideas, and learning enough about emerging technologies to understand their potential impact on your life. This isn't just intellectually stimulating. It's practically essential for navigating our changing world with grace and wisdom. It's like continuing to grow in our spiritual understanding. We never stop learning. Consider online banking, telehealth, digital communication with loved ones. Not long ago, these were new. Today, they're fundamental tools for maintaining independence and connection. Our seniors who embrace these new ways often find more options and greater control over their lives. It's about opening ourselves to new blessings. Financial prudence is another area where our individual actions, guided by wisdom, can make a profound difference. But we must approach it with a refreshed mindset. The old model, work hard, save diligently, invest safely, and let compound interest grow, served previous generations beautifully in times of stable prices and predictable returns. However, in an era where inflation is eroding the value of traditional savings and investments, we need a more discerning, more prayerful approach. This doesn't mean succumbing to fear or chasing risky schemes. It means seeking God's wisdom in diversifying our resources in ways that build resilience against various economic shifts. It means holding assets that can weather inflation, investing in innovations that bless humanity, and cultivating resources that hold intrinsic value beyond fluctuating currencies. It also means being more thoughtful and strategic in our spending, not out of fear, but out of faith and stewardship. Investing in our long-term health, reducing reliance on potentially unreliable systems, and crucially, building strong relationships and acquiring practical skills that create a security deeper than mere financial wealth. True wealth includes our well-being and our connections. And speaking of well-being, our health, my friends, deserves profound attention. It is both a personal blessing and a powerful hedge against economic uncertainty. In a world of rising healthcare costs and potential disruptions to services, your physical and mental well-being becomes an even more precious asset. This isn't just about regular checkups and medications, though those are important. It's about intentionally cultivating strength, independence, and resilience. Regular exercise that maintains your mobility, vibrant social connections that nourish your mental and emotional health, intellectual engagement that keeps your mind sharp, and practical skills that reduce your dependence on external services. These are all gifts that empower us to live victoriously. But individual preparation, as vital as it is only part of the divine design. The greater opportunities, the true blessings, often emerge from our community responses. You know, one of the most interesting things I've observed is how economic disruption often has a beautiful effect of strengthening local communities, even as larger institutions face their own trials. When people find they cannot rely solely on distant corporations or government programs to meet their needs, they rediscover the profound value of neighbors, local businesses, and the power of coming together in community. This is God's design for us, to be connected. During the pandemic, we witnessed this beautiful truth everywhere. Neighborhood groups organizing grocery deliveries for seniors, local restaurants creatively pivoting to serve their communities, people discovering the hidden gifts and resources in their very next-door neighbors. These acts of kindness and collaboration are powerful demonstrations of God's love in action. This kind of local resilience becomes even more crucial when larger economic systems are unstable. And here, our seniors have unique advantages. You possess invaluable experience, skills, and often a precious gift of time that younger generations may not yet have. You remember how communities functioned before everything became centralized and digitized. You have networks of relationships built over decades that are priceless. Your wisdom is a treasure. There is enormous God-given potential in intergenerational cooperation. Our seniors sharing their knowledge and wisdom, younger people contributing their energy and technical skills, middle-aged individuals providing leadership and resources. But these divine connections don't happen automatically. They require intentional effort to build bridges of understanding across generations and create structures that bless everyone, reflecting the unity God desires for His people. I envision successful examples I've seen, like community gardens where seniors impart traditional growing techniques, while younger generations contribute sustainable practices. Tool libraries where neighbors share, reducing individual burden instead of everyone buying their own. Skill-sharing networks where people exchange services based on their God-given talents, rather than what they can afford to pay for. These might seem like small initiatives, but they are profound, faith-filled responses to economic disruption. They create value outside the traditional monetary system. They build relationships that provide security beyond what any individual savings account can offer. And they demonstrate that human ingenuity, blessed by God, can solve problems that seem overwhelming when you're facing them alone. At a larger scale, there is every reason to believe that the very forces causing disruption can also drive an innovation-led recovery, propelled by God-given inspiration. History reveals that periods of economic crisis often coincide with groundbreaking innovations. The technologies that powered the post-war boom, computers, jet engines, nuclear power, plastics, were largely developed during the economic hardships of the 1930s and 40s. The internet, which transformed the economy starting in the 1990s, emerged from the stagflation of the 1970s. God uses challenges to birth new creativity. Today's challenges are spurring similar innovation. Artificial intelligence and automation may eliminate some jobs, but they are also opening doors to possibilities we can barely imagine. Clean energy technologies promise to reduce costs and increase energy independence. Medical advances could dramatically extend healthy lifespans and reduce healthcare burdens. New materials and manufacturing techniques could make many products cheaper and more accessible. God is always doing a new thing. The question isn't if these innovations will emerge, they are already here. The question for us is how quickly they will scale and how broadly their blessings will be shared across humanity, which brings us to the final and most vital point. While we cannot always control what is coming, we absolutely can choose how we meet it, with faith, with courage, and with a spirit of victory. Now, I want to be very clear. I'm not suggesting that what lies ahead will be effortless or that simple positive thinking alone will erase complex economic problems. Real disruption can indeed bring real hardship for real people, and some changes will involve genuine losses that we must acknowledge and process. But I am declaring that how we frame what's happening through the lens of faith profoundly influences how we respond. And how we respond, my friends, absolutely shapes what happens next. If we perceive what's coming as merely a worse version of past recessions, we'll spend our precious energy trying to revert to the old normal. We'll wait for others, politicians, central bankers, business leaders, to restore what was, and we will be disappointed because the old normal was built on foundations that are no longer. If instead we view what's happening as a transition, a season God is using to bring forth something new, then we can focus our God-given energy on understanding what that something new might look like and how to position ourselves advantageously within it. This isn't naive optimism, it's faith-filled strategic realism. The world is changing whether we like it or not. The question is whether we change with it in ways that serve our values and protect what matters most to us. For our seniors, this perspective is especially powerful because you possess something younger generations are still acquiring: perspective. You've navigated multiple cycles of change. You've seen predictions of doom dissipate and promises emerge. You also carry another invaluable asset in times of uncertainty: a freedom to explore new approaches. If you're retired, you don't have the same concerns about career advancement or professional reputation in the traditional sense. You have the freedom to experiment, to innovate, to bless. That freedom can be enormously valuable, both for your own spiritual and practical adaptation, and as a shining example of resilience for others. That young man I mentioned earlier, who witnessed President Nixon's announcement in 1971, he became one of the world's most successful investors. Not because he possessed a crystal ball, but because he learned to observe patterns, understand divine principles, and position himself for multiple possible futures simultaneously. He had faith to adapt. That's the approach that makes sense for us now, my friends. Not trying to predict every detail, but building spiritual resilience and practical adaptability so we can respond effectively with God's guidance to whatever unfolds. And that's why these conversations are so important, because spiritual awareness and understanding are the first steps to true resilience and living in victory. What's coming may be a season of significant challenge, far beyond a typical recession, but it does not have to break us. If we grasp the forces at play, stay adaptable in spirit and action, and make choices rooted in clarity and faith, we can not only endure, but we can build something stronger, more faith-filled, and more blessed for the next generation. The debt cycles will eventually reset, and for those who understand God's principles of stewardship, this creates new opportunities. Inflation will eventually stabilize, but in the meantime, we can learn to protect our resources and even find blessings in the transition. Geopolitical changes will create new alignments, and being aware helps us position ourselves wisely, guided by divine discernment. Technology will continue to revolutionize our traditional ways of doing things, but it will also create powerful new tools and possibilities that can profoundly improve our lives. Most importantly, my friends, the God-given human capacity for adaptation, for innovation, and for mutual support in community remains as strong as it has ever been. Every previous generation has faced changes that seemed overwhelming at the time, but ultimately proved manageable. We have advantages they didn't have: better communication, more information, longer lifespans, more accumulated wealth and knowledge. We are blessed. What we need now is the divine wisdom to use those advantages thoughtfully, the courage that comes from faith to face uncertainty without fear or denial, and the patience to build lasting solutions that will serve not just ourselves, but the generations that follow us, leaving a legacy of faith and strength. If this conversation has given you new perspective and instilled a renewed sense of hope, I would love to hear your thoughts. What changes do you feel God is bringing forth? Please share your reflections in the comments below. And if this message has encouraged you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next message of hope and empowerment. Because the more we prepare our hearts and minds together, the better chance we all have of facing the future with unwavering confidence and victorious faith. If this conversation gave you a new perspective, or if you feel a renewed sense of hope and clarity about the future, please do two things. Hit the like button to let me know this message resonated with you. Most importantly, subscribe to the channel right now. When you subscribe and turn on notifications, you ensure you won't miss the next message of hope, empowerment, and strategic realism that will help you and your family navigate this season of transformation. Your support helps us share this message of faith and preparation with the world. Now go forth, stay wise, and live in victory. God bless you.